Thanks to Baron of Dice, Grey Matter Gaming, and Monument Hobbies for sponsoring this video.
Hi, I'm Campbell McLaughlin, and I regret to inform you that it's July and this filming space is not air-conditioned. Today we're going to be looking at the 2024 edition of the General's Handbook for Warhammer Age of Sigmar 4th edition. For the uninitiated, the General's Handbook contains new rules, missions, and balance changes, and over the course of the past 3 editions has wildly changed how games are played and armies are built. The focus of these is primarily matched play, but whether you're competing in a grand tournament or just a casual ham slam, you'll want to know what's going on. If you'd rather read this information than look at my pretty face for half an hour, a written version of this article is available on our website, goonhammer.com. You can find that linked in the description below, along with links to our Patreon and the Tabletop Battles app. This General's Handbook doesn't do anything too radical, allowing players to get accustomed to the new edition. Inside are 6 generic battle tactics to score, as well as a pair of battle tactics for each of the 4 Grand Alliances. These are the secondary objectives you'll be accomplishing in your games. There are also rules for your Honor Guard. One unit in your General's regiment, aside from your General of course, becomes their Honor Guard, granting one of 3 abilities for the game. You get to choose your Honor Guard and their abilities during deployment, but most players will typically have some idea in mind when they're building their army. Crucially, these Honor Guard units can also be in reserve. This book also contains the core rules of Age of Sigmar 4th edition, a tournament organizers pack, and rules for manifestations. We won't be getting too deep into any of these as we already have a video covering the core rules, and this video is going to be long enough as is, but we'll at least cover the high points. Honor Guard abilities. Special assignment. Your Honor Guard gains one of the following weapon abilities, granting their melee weapons +1 rend on any turn they charge. This doesn't affect companion weapons though, so no spicy horses for your Chaos Knights. These abilities are Anti-Infantry, Anti-Cavalry, Anti-Monster, Anti-War Machine, Anti-Beast. Priority Target. Add 1 to hit and wound rolls for attacks that target the enemy general's regiment. It's pretty straightforward. Bodyguard. Subtract 1 from the attacks characteristics of enemy units within your general's combat range if the Honor Guard did not charge and is wholly within 6 inches of your general. It's more of a defensive bonus, but good for a less aggressive army. Army construction in previous editions forced these types of choices during list building and prevented players from making adjustments on the fly in games where a skew matchup occurred. The chances of pairing into someone with a skew list at an event is pretty high, and anything that can cut down on the rock, paper, scissors nature of that interaction is a good thing. If someone is running a low drop list with a loaded general's regiment, taking priority target on your main melee unit is a great pick. On the other hand, consider how many units are in your own general's regiment and how much your opponent could benefit from taking the same thing against you. You can have up to 4 units in there, but giving your opponent an easy +1 to hit and wound against them might end up being a bad choice. Battle Tactics. There are 6 universal battle tactics everyone gets to choose from, and then 2 per Grand Alliance. Each army nominally belongs to one of these 4 Grand Alliances, but this is more or less the last vestige of this whole idea from Age of Sigmar's launch back in 2015. You choose 1 battle tactic at the start of your turn to score by the end of your turn, but if you win the priority roll and elect to take a double turn, you cannot pick a battle tactic to score. Battle tactics are worth 4 points each, so it's worth considering whether or not those points are worth the damage you can do with a double turn. Universal Battle Tactics. Do not waver. Complete this battle tactic if 2 or more friendly units fought and no friendly units were destroyed. Take their land. Pick a terrain feature wholly or partially within enemy territory and wholly outside friendly territory. You complete this tactic if you control it at the end of your turn. Slay the Entourage. Rip to turtle, I guess. Pick a unit in the enemy general's regiment. You complete this battle tactic if that unit is destroyed this turn. Attack on 2 fronts. You complete this battle tactic if you control 2 or more objectives that you did not previously control and at least one of those objectives was controlled by your opponent. Seize the Center. Have 2 or more friendly units within 3 inches of the center of the battlefield and not in combat. Take the Flanks. Have a unit within 6 inches of each short battlefield edge. Those units have to be outside of friendly territory and cannot have been set up this turn. The easiest turn 1 tactic here is Seize the Center. Since your units only need to be within 3 inches of the center and not wholly within 3 inches of the center, they can just toe in with the edge of a base or 2. Otherwise, take the flanks and take their land are solid picks for armies with faster units. Aside from take their land and slay the entourage, none of these require you to pick a specific unit or objective, so you can easily set up some contingencies. It's worth holding your general's regiment back while you score those board control secondaries so you don't give up slay the entourage early on. Order tactics. Reclaim the realms. Complete this if you have one or more friendly units wholly within each quarter and more than 6 inches from all enemy units. Slay the tyrants. Complete this tactic if an enemy hero is slain by a combat attack. Slay the tyrants is going to happen in more games than it doesn't, whether you're planning on it or not. Reclaim the realms will take more planning to score, mostly because you'll need some very quick units or ones that can teleport or deep strike. You only have to have a unit in every quarter. There's no minimum distance between quarters, so a single hero whose base is just over the line will do it for you. You'll want to take this one earlier in the game before your army starts getting depleted or stuck in grinding combats. Chaos tactics. Offering of Carnage. Destroy 2 or more enemy units. Simple, no notes. Ordained Charge. Pick an objective controlled by your opponent. Complete this if 2 or more friendly units successfully charged and one of those is contesting that objective and you control it. Offering of Carnage is going to be pretty easy to set up against most armies, and it has the benefit for Chaos players of not specifying how those units have to die. Ordained Charge seems to be a fine tactic that relies on making some charges in the right places. What are you going to do? Fail multiple charges in a turn? Not me. Not never. Death tactics. Marked for the grave. Pick a non-hero enemy unit that hasn't lost any models. Complete this battle tactic if it is destroyed this turn. If there are no non-hero enemy units, you can pick any unit. Inevitable Demise. Complete this tactic if 2 or more friendly units are wholly within enemy territory, more than 9 inches from all enemy units, and were not set up this turn. These seem fine. Marked for the Grave will be great against armies with weaker support units, and Inevitable Demise is like a slightly spookier Seize the Center. That one will be easier to score against elite armies with poor board control, or if your own army has a lot of fast skirmishers like dire wolves. Even if these tactics seem situational, death armies won't be struggling too much with the basic ones. Destruction tactics. Time to get stuck in. Pick 3 units not in combat that are wholly within friendly territory. Complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if each of those units is wholly outside your territory and used a fight ability this turn. The Cunning approach. Pick an enemy unit that is in combat and a friendly unit that is not in combat. You complete this tactic if the friendly unit gets into combat with the enemy unit and the enemy unit is destroyed. Time to get stuck in gets worse the longer you look at it and is too situational to really pull off. Battle plans where half of the table is your territory are going to be a lot easier to score this on, and even then, it's still not going to be that easy to pull off. Note that the 3 units you pick for this also need to use a fight ability, so if they get killed before they can attack, or don't have any more targets, they won't count towards scoring this one. This is made up for with the Cunning approach, which sounds a little convoluted, but it rewards dogpiling a unit, which destruction armies typically do really well. While some factions are going to have an easier time scoring these, between the generic and Grand Alliance battle tactics, every faction should be able to build into 6 or 7 they can achieve in any given game. In test games, we've had a variety of outcomes, but as you put together a list, you should think about having 2 tactics that aren't Seize the Center that you can score on the first turn. On many of the maps, that is going to require 1 or 2 quicker moving scout type units like Ether Wings or Fell Riders. The battle plans. Missions shoot for a clean max score of 10 points per round, 6 for the mission victory points and 4 for your battle tactic. You can keep track of these on a provided score sheet or in our extremely handy Tabletop Battles app. You will hear me plug this app until the day I die. What's new? Some of these battle plans might look familiar to returning players, but they've all had a few tweaks for the new edition. Here are a few things to look out for. Deployment zones. Age of Sigmar didn't have a nice and neat 4x4 grid to outline deployment until 3rd edition. As a result, there were some wonky deployments that have mercifully been streamlined. Layouts. Each battle plan has a suggested terrain layout. Not quite as prescriptive as Warhammer 40k's terrain layouts, but with enough guidance to keep your battlefield from looking like a golf course. Scoring. Gaining points for holding 1 objective, holding 2 objectives, and holding more objectives than your opponent, typically shortened to hold 1, hold 2, hold more, is a fairly recent idea. Not every mission uses it exactly, but most use some variation of it. Twists. 4th edition introduces twists, an advantage granted to the underdog who is behind in scoring. You might recognize a few of these from previous scenarios, but mostly they offer some small bonus to the underdog. Game design has improved. These missions resemble those from previous editions, but with years of tweaks and improvements, they're more enjoyable and more balanced than they ever were before. Grand strategies are gone. You might notice on the score sheet, but the grand strategies of old, they're out of here. The focus is just on primary mission victory points and battle tactics now. Border War. This is a returning favorite dating back to the original General's Handbook from 2016. It's a solid, simple mission that updates quite cleanly and was revisited in 2021's Savage Gains. There are 4 objectives. Holding your own is worth 1 point, each border objective is worth 2 points, and your opponent's objective is worth a whopping 5 points. With the 6-point limit on primary points, you can't really get greedy and run away with the game. If anything, you'll want to be prudent and not overextend yourself too much trying to grab points. The twist. The underdog gets +1 to hit with units that charge and contest the objective in enemy territory, encouraging a bold last-second push to their enemy's objective to come back from behind. Focal points. Not to be confused with the Focal Points mission in the 2020 General's Handbook. Completely different mission, no relation. The goal of this mission is to capture objectives that are across from each other on a center cross. The objectives are named home and flank instead of any sort of abstract numbering. There is a 1, 2, more mechanic, and then an additional 2 points for holding one of the crosses. Do you go wide for the easier to grab flanks, or do you push into your opponent's home territory for the home objective cross? The twist. The underdog can change the central objective to either a home or flank objective. They only need to hold 2 of the same kind of objective to score 3 points, so they can consolidate onto objectives much closer together. Star Strike. This is one of those missions where the general thrust remains the same as an older mission, but a lot is modified around it. On the first turn, the active player sets up an objective on the center horizontal line, randomly determining its position based on a 2d6 die roll. At the start of the 3rd battle round, the active player repeats this process on the horizontal lines cutting through both the player's territories. Probability dictates these landing most often on the 6, 7, and 8 lines, but this mission is inherently swingy. They also address that you cannot put objectives on terrain pieces, so if an objective marker would land where a piece of terrain is, instead that terrain piece becomes an impact site, and controlling that terrain piece scores you points just like an objective. Of course, a giant hunk of space metal crashing to the battlefield does d6 mortal damage to all units within that terrain piece. That scoring is a simple 3 points for holding an objective and 3 for holding more than your opponent. Now the whole mission is essentially the twist here, but the underdog gets a little damage mitigation. If their units are in the terrain piece being turned into an impact site, they can make their opponent reroll the die for mortal damage on the underdog's units. Shifting objectives. This map has a huge no man's land, and I can see it being included in a lot of tournament packs just for variety with its deployment zones. Each battle round, the active player rolls a d3, determining the primary objective, which is worth 2 points. The others are secondary objectives and are worth a single point. If you control more objectives than your opponent, you get an additional 2 points. The twist. The underdog is able to make the active player reroll the die to determine which objective is the primary objective. Feral Foray. This mission has a simple setup, with 3 objectives in each player's territory and a simple hold 1, hold 2, hold more scoring mechanic. While it might seem like this could become a stalemate, the twist and underdog rule really reward you for attacking. Going second and breaking that stalemate with a scout unit is gonna be worthwhile. The twist. At the start of the battle round, each player can raid an enemy objective they control. This objective cannot be contested or controlled this battle round. The underdog can raid an objective in enemy territory that they contest but do not control. Jaws of Galette, the best Sigmar can get. This is a much-loved mission around the totally real Goonhammer offices. It has 5 objectives with typical hold 1, hold 2, hold more scoring. The twist. Starting in round 2, the underdog gets to pick an objective to remove from the table if they wish. If there is no underdog, no objective gets pulled. Previously, the player that went second that round was the one to pull an objective. It makes the decision to take a double turn that much more difficult, as you're not only giving up a battle tactic, but you're letting your opponent dictate the flow of the entire battle. It may encourage a player to deliberately come up an objective short, just so they can better control the board. Battle for the Pass. It's like Border War, but sideways. Identical to Border War for scoring purposes, holding your own home objective is worth 1 point, each border objective is worth 2 points, and holding your opponent's objective is worth 5. It does utilize a short edge deployment instead of the long edge, so armies will have to hike further up the field than they would in Border War. The twist. The underdog can add +2 to the control score for non-hero units, which allows that player to reclaim some ground from their opponent in a slightly less aggressive way than Border War's +1 to hit. Scorched Earth. Once more, we've got simple hold 1, hold 2, hold more scoring, but with 8 objectives to fight over. The twist. From the second battle round onwards, the active player can pick an objective in enemy territory that they contest and remove it from play. The previous version of this mission awarded points for this, but now it just denies your opponent the opportunity to gain ground. The underdog can choose one of the objectives in their territory that they control and subtract 5 from the control score of any enemy units contesting it, until the end of the battle round. The better part of Valor. At first blush, this mission seems pretty vanilla, with a typical looking deployment map, 6 objectives, and standard 1-2 more scoring. The twist is what brings it to life. Each time a unit contesting an objective is destroyed by a fight ability from a non-hero unit, that attacking unit gains the dominant keyword. That unit of doms gains 10 to their control score and is dominant until it leaves that objective. The underdogs units add 1 to hit rolls against dominant units. The Vice. One of the best missions from 3rd edition gets an update with a welcome change to deployment. The objectives start in the corners of the map, but gradually move towards the center, closing in on turn 2 and collapsing into a single objective on turn 4. The twist. At the end of the underdog's turn, they can pick an objective and cause D3 mortal damage to each unit contesting it, both theirs and their opponents. Close to the chest. The interlocking Tetris L blocks with a bit of neutral territory in the corners gives this mission a slightly different flavor than the rest. There are points awarded for holding 1, 2, or more objectives, with 2 points for holding more objectives than your opponent. Players are also awarded an extra 2 points for controlling the primary objective. The twist. The player who is not the active player chooses an objective in their territory to be the primary objective. The underdog can roll a die and on a 5-up force their opponent to pick a different objective to be the primary objective. Limited resources. This one's for all you who like mining for Vespene gas, Tiberium, or what have you. While you score points for holding 1, 2, or more objectives as per usual, if the active player controls an objective they controlled the previous turn, it's spent and they can no longer extract resources from it. The twist. While the active player can no longer score those depleted objectives, they can still contest them to keep their opponent from doing the same. The underdog adds 3 to the control score of their units which are extracting resources. The Tournament Organizers Pack. Dead in the middle of this book is a section on running tournaments. Honestly, this won't be that useful for most people, but if you're planning on running any sort of event, there's some good game agnostic advice in here. It touches on how to set up a day's schedule, what sort of standards you want for appearances, finding an appropriate venue, and what to do about feeding your players. There's even a sample sheet you can photocopy and use for your own events, which is a great starting point for anything from a 3-day GT to a one-off narrative event. Manifestations. The last thing we're going to talk about today is manifestations. Think of manifesting less as a wellness trend about the power of positive thinking and more like a way to summon a cool dragon skeleton. It's less the secret, more the Necronomicon. The way these work are covered in the advanced section of the core rules, which we already covered in the previous video, link somewhere around here, but the universal endless spells are here in the General's Handbook, along with a Kronspine Incarnate. It's also worth noting that none of the manifestations in this book can be taken by priests, wizards only. Checkmate, theists. Taking endless spells. Unlike the old days, you don't have to pay points for endless spells. You just pick a lore and any of your wizards can cast any of the spells they're in. There are 6 manifestation lores in all, each built around a certain theme. You'll need to forgive me as I cover the high points. There's some extremely made up words in here. Kronspine. Everybody's favorite magic dragon skeleton stands alone. He's the only spell in his entire lore. He's a manifestation hunter and a credible melee threat in his own right. Forbidden Power. This is the spooky themed one, and its main goal is shutting down enemy units and transporting your dudes across the table. Shards of Valagar grounds flying enemies and prevents enemy units from setting up nearby. The Horrorghast has a shooting attack that shuts off commands on an enemy unit for a turn. The Soul Scream Bridge sets up 2 spots on the board where you can teleport units back and forth, even pulling them out of combat if you want. Last is Laoshan the Soul Seeker, who lets you taxi your wizards around the table in exchange for a point of mortal damage. This whole spell lore is great for slow armies who want to zone out faster enemies or just get their slower models up the table. Morbid Conjuration. This is a straightforward lore, focused mostly on doing raw damage or buffing the damage output of your own units. Soul Snare Shackles sets up 3 bases that cause some light mortal damage and slow down enemy units. Malevolent Maelstrom powers up when spells are cast or models die near it, and then explodes in a big mortal damage bomb. Suffocating Gravetide flies around the table doing mortal damage to units it passes over. The Purple Sun of Shaiish can cause some mortal damage, but its real utility is in reducing the save rolls of enemy units within 3 inches. It also causes mortal damage on anyone who has to build that fucking thing. Aetherwrought Machineries. This lore has 1 great support ability, and a few that focus on doing damage. Chronomantic Cogs can either give all your friendly units within 12 inches rerolls to their charge distance, or reduce 1 from hit rolls targeting friendly wizards nearby. That latter one doesn't make much sense unless you're protecting a big honkin' wizard like Teclis or Archaon. Aether Void Pendulum causes a hefty amount of mortal damage on units it passes over. Lastly, Quicksilver Swords just spits out a buttload of low damage attacks that cut through ward saves. It's really great for Fire Slayers or any other faction that depends on ward saves to survive. Primal Energy. These spells are a mix of shooting, melee, and healing. The Burning Head has some decent shooting attacks, but it burns up every turn, causing itself a point of mortal damage. Ravenak's Gnashing Jaws moves around with a wildly unpredictable 3d6-inch move and does a ton of damage on the charge. Emerald Lifeswarm heals both itself and a friendly unit every turn, making it a great support piece for monsters or other units with a high health count per model. Twilight Sorceries. This is the only lore that focuses exclusively on support spells. Geminids of Ulgish shuts down enemy command abilities within 3 inches of either of these magical meatballs. Umbral Spell Portal is for all you wizards who prefer thinking with portals. You cast a spell in one end and it comes out the other. Prismatic Palisade sets up a wall where no shooting attacks can go through. Great for walling off an enemy gun line or protecting a hard-to-hide unit from shooting. Wrapping up. This General's Handbook is playing the hits, taking some of the best missions from previous seasons and gently massaging them to fit with the new edition. It's refreshing to see a whole pack of missions without any stinkers in the bunch, and the suggested terrain layouts should help standardize games for competitive play. The Honor Guard mechanic is a nice way to offer up some counterplay in tough matchups, and a thematic and useful addition to even more narrative games. Lastly, the inclusion of universal manifestations and the little tournament organizer's guide ensure that there's something in here for just about anybody interested in Age of Sigmar. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting us on Patreon, where for just a few bucks a month, you can get expanded features in the Tabletop Battles app, first dibs on tickets to Goonhammer events like the recent Goonhammer Open in Baltimore, and early access to videos like this one. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Baron of Dice, Monument Hobbies, and Grey Matter Gaming for making these videos possible. I'm Campbell McLaughlin, here to remind you that if you double turn me, I'll cry. Thanks for watching.